Rightly or wrongly, the Sunshine Coast and Vancouver Island oftentimes get lumped together as being one and the same thing. And in this video, we want to discuss whether that is a fair comparison to make between the two and what the differences between the two communities really are.
Yes, there's differences and there's similarities, and very interesting conversation to finally have with you guys.
If we look at a map of Canada, you can see that the Sunshine Coast is very geographically close to Vancouver Island. If you went outside and you looked around, I think the uninitiated would be forgiven for saying that they look similar. We've got ocean, we've got mountains. They're both very, very pretty. But the truth of it is that when we're talking about a comparison between the two, Vancouver Island is a huge, big island with 800 or 850,000 some odd people living on it, made up of big cities and small villages and all those different things. And the Sunshine Coast is really just a very specific region on the coast of Canada that only runs for like 100 or 120 kilometers from the bottom to the top before you go to Powell River and the northern Sunshine Coast. And we're made up of small rural communities. The biggest community would be the district of Seashelt, and I think the population is 10,000-ish people, but that makes up a pretty big geographic area and is made up of littler places like Davis Bay and Tewanek and those types of things.
Yeah, and so the island is actually an island, and we are part of the mainland, but there is a ferry that goes to each. So then that's why sometimes people will think that we are an island, that the Sunshine Coast is an island. But the ferry from Horseshoe Bay, for example, to the island, to the Nanaimo, is an hour and 40 minutes. And then to Langdale, so onto the Sunshine Coast, is 40-minute ferry ride. So it's about a little bit more than twice as far to take a ferry and get to the island.
The biggest difference in my mind between the two is the size and the variety of communities. Like we touched on, it's very small, very rural here. And if you're into that, then the Sunshine Coast might be a great fit for you. Whereas if you're not so much into that, then Vancouver Island's maybe a better fit because you could live in a Victoria or a Nanaimo or a Courtenay Comox. They're getting to be a fairly large size as well. And you feel more like you're in a city as opposed to a small town. I think our lifestyle is more homogenous on the Sunshine Coast than it is Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
Right? That if you decide you're going to live in Hopkins Landing or you're going to live up around Half Moon Bay, there are differences between those two on the coast, but largely it's going to be a similar experience.
Yeah.
But if you decided you were going to move to Vancouver Island and live in Victoria, that would be one specific type of experience. Then if you said, I'm going to move to the north end of the island to Port Hardy, that would be a very different type of existence. Yeah. And they would both have things to like and to not like. Mm-hmm. But you don't have that choice here on the coast. Vancouver Island is somewhat famously known for having a high cost of living. And I think that a lot of Vancouver Island residents will probably comment angrily when I say this, but our cost of living here, I think, is actually far higher than it is on Vancouver Island as a whole. To go and buy a home in Victoria, yes, very expensive. But if you were coming from another province and you were on a set amount of money you could spend, you would have more variety of choice on Vancouver Island than you would on the Sunshine Coast.
Yes, there's a wider variety of choices for sure on the island, a bigger range. On the Sunshine Coast, not so much. Like, for example, Gibson's, like our average family home in Gibson's is around $920,000, just under $1 million. But on the island, you can still find a home for $420,000, a detached home.
If you were thinking you were going to move to BC and a major consideration was being able to afford to buy a home, then you're probably looking at Vancouver Island. Mm-hmm. Because if you said, okay, I can only spend up to, say, $400,000 on a single family home, then right away, right off the top, you're going to probably chop off most of Victoria and the larger centers. But then as you move up coast on Vancouver Island, prices will drop accordingly. And you'll find that your dollar will go further. Whereas on the Sunshine Coast, our immediate comparison is Vancouver. So when you look at a house in Vancouver and you say, oh, that house is worth $3 million in Vancouver, then you come up here and it's $1 million. It seems like a real scream of a deal. I think the other thing that's happening right now on the Sunshine Coast is that we're experiencing some of what Vancouver Island probably would have dealt with decades ago. So these problems, while they're new and frustrating to us, I think that this is stuff that the Nanaimos and the Duncans and the Ladysmiths of the world already dealt with and more or less have figured out now. We're trying to figure out what kind of a community we are. I think in decades past, living in Gibson's, it was very rural and it was very clearly rural. Mm-hmm. Right? You had a blue collar job, you lived and worked on the coast, and you didn't really go to the city unless you absolutely had to. You didn't have people, I don't think, largely commuting back and forth. And I don't think you had a huge mass of people that are used to living in an urban lifestyle migrating here and saying, oh, why don't I have more of these amenities that I'm used to? And I think we're still trying to figure that out. Is Gibson's going to be a small city, or is it going to grow in size and be a big town? And I think a lot of places on Vancouver Island have figured that out. And I think that Gibson's is trying to figure out how much of its past it's going to hold on to as it goes forward, turning into this new thing that it's going to be in 10 or 20 or 50 years. And I think there's a lot of hand-wringing and consternation about that. In one way, that would be a big benefit of living on Vancouver Island, is because I think compared to the Sunshine Coast, you more or less know what you're getting into. Whereas moving in here, you might be a dramatically different vibe 10 or 15 years from now.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, now that you're saying it, just Gibson's trying to figure itself out as far as this community. Like, are you a small little community, or are you a bigger urban center? Families, tourists, fitting it all in.
Exactly.
And so much development happening. And how much do we allow development? How much do we spread out that development? How much do we build it on top of each other?
I think this is the type of angst that pretty much any community in Canada goes through to varying degrees. So I don't think what we're talking about here is like groundbreaking. Just in the 7 or 8 years we've been here, like, it has been seismic, the change that we've seen. And I imagine that that's going to progress going forward.
Yep. All right. We ended up focusing a little bit more on Gibson's here, but let's go back to the similarities or differences between the coast and the island. Highway-wise, Vancouver Island has the big Island Highway, Highway 19, and then the other highway that's along the ocean, along the water. So there's the inland highway. So they have 2 highways. We only have one. We have Highway 101 that runs from, just all along the coast. And so it's a busy highway with your average speed from 60 to 80 kilometers an hour, but it's not a big freeway. It's not 4 lanes. It's 2 lanes. There's entrances in and out. There's like little crossroads everywhere. So ideally, we would like to have another highway up higher and have a big inland highway just like the island does, but we don't.
It's kind of like what we talked about before, is that Vancouver Island is just more mature in that respect. Their infrastructure is just further along. They dealt with this population issue that they had a long time ago. And we're kind of just getting to the point that we're realizing, our one little single 2-lane highway that services the entire coast just isn't really going to cut it for the next 20 years. And at what point is the realization made that we need to have a bypass or a wider highway or whatever it is? And is that 2 years from now? Is that 15 years from now? I think that there's no doubt that it's eventually coming, but what does it look like? And what does life look like in the extremes before it actually happens? Are we sitting in traffic for hours to go to Seashelt? What happens? I don't know.
Yeah.
And if that type of uncertainty is really a turnoff, then again, if you go to Vancouver Island, you're going to get 4-lane highways. You're going to get,
if one highway's backed up, you could take the other highway. If there's an incident on one highway, you take the other one. Here, we don't have that option. It just gets backed up.
I also think that when you're talking infrastructure on Vancouver Island, I don't think it's such a shock to the system anymore. You have big highways and you have airports and you have all these different things that we go to Vancouver for.
Yeah.
And now when we're saying, okay, this is what we're going to do, we're going to build a 4-lane highway that bypasses Gibson's on the way to Seashelt, or, bigger infrastructure projects, then people that have lived here their whole lives, they have to look at it and say, no, this is not what I recognize as my town anymore, and I don't want it. Or they're going to have to accept that it's happening with or without them.
Oh, there's a lot of people here all along that are welcoming that kind of infrastructure for sure, because they're finding it dangerous in their little communities and backing out of their driveway onto Highway 101. And so, yeah, just safety-wise, for sure, we are so ready for that second highway.
And when we talk about infrastructure, I guess that kind of leads to amenities as well, or activities would be another way to look at it. Both places have pretty much everything you need. Here on the coast, we have a hospital, we've got movie theaters, we've got grocery stores, we've got kind of everything you need. And Vancouver Island is much the same way, but they just have more of it and more choice because they're serving hundreds of thousands of people. So where we rely on the city to go to maybe for like a medical procedure, or if you want to go to a big store like Costco, you can do that on Vancouver Island without leaving the island.
The island in comparison does have a lot of services, like you had said. So then even if you're in a smaller center on the island, you just have to get to a bigger center and usually get the services that you need there without having to take a ferry and go to Vancouver.
We're a smaller population base, so we have fewer schools and fewer students than we would in, Vancouver, let's say. And so when we're talking about things like sports, you're either traveling off coast with kids to go to different events, or you just are constricted to the coast. Whereas in Vancouver Island, you don't really have that. That yes, maybe it is however many hours to go from point A to point B, but you can reliably understand, okay, I need to take the highway for an hour to get there, and then I can turn around and come back. Or no, I have to go so far that it's 3 hours. That means we need a hotel for the night to go to this tournament. Whereas here, sometimes it's just a crapshoot with the ferry. Will you get on the ferry? Won't you get on the ferry? And we've heard of kids going to sporting events in the city that for whatever reason, they don't get on the last ferry.
Yeah.
And so now you've got a 10 or a 12-year-old kid in Horseshoe Bay with no credit card trying to figure out what he's going to do for the night.
Yeah.
And I think that is a problem you do not experience on Vancouver Island.
No. For some reason, you made me think of airports as well. Of course, our airport is a smaller airport. You can fly into the nearby smaller or bigger centers, but you're not getting big flights here across Canada landing at the Seashelt Davis Bay Airport.
That's right. Yeah, you're not going to Seashelt and saying, may I please get on a direct flight to Calgary or Saskatoon or something like that. You're going to go from here to likely Vancouver, and then get off that plane and then get onto a larger plane to go to your destination. Whereas if you're living on Vancouver Island, for sure out of Victoria, you're going to have a lot of options. Out of Victoria, out of Comox, you're going to have a lot of options. Yeah. And again, here it's not, if you want a direct flight, then you're looking at, if you drive, then it's a couple hours to get to the airport. And if you're going to walk on, depending what traffic's like, it can be anywhere from 3 to 4 hours for you to get to the airport. Politically, we're more or less all left leaning. Not that there aren't pockets of right leaning people that think differently, but I think it's more accepted that if you come here, you're kind of left leaning, either moderately or in the extreme, right?
I think if we're going to sum up, we could say a lot of the similarities are you're in southern BC, it's a milder climate, living by the ocean, rainforesty, you can have rolling hills, or you can go up to the mountains, you can reach it both. You have all kinds of elevation for life and activities. Ones that are not similar is Vancouver Island is actually an island, and we're on the mainland. That we have maybe a little bit less options affordability wise, as in it's not so big geographically. But then with how big the island is, you have a little bit more options for choosing your affordability, whether you're in a Victoria or you're in a smaller center.
Really, the big difference between the two in my mind is the affordability and the difference in infrastructure.
Yeah.
That if you're happy paying more money, I was going to say a little bit more money, but appreciably more money to live a more rural lifestyle for an indefinite period of time, then the Sunshine Coast, you can't go wrong. If you have budget constraints when it comes to buying a home, like most normal people in this country are budget constrained when they buy a house, then you're probably looking at a smaller center on Vancouver Island. That probably makes more sense for you. And then you're going to have to sacrifice some of the proximity to a big city, but you'll have easy access to it. You won't have to deal with a ferry to access those amenities in a larger center.